Welcome back to another episode of Psychiatry, Rewritten. My name is Lane. Everyone knows someone who's been sexually abused. But somehow, no one knows an abuser. Statistically, that doesn't make sense. Because the numbers are too high. The stories are the pain. It's everywhere. We see these survivors. We are these survivors. But when it comes to the people who caused the harm, everyone gets quiet. And that silence, that's how it keeps happening. Hey, before we start, I want to say something. This is the beginning of a series about sexual abuse, trafficking, coercion, and survival. In all the forms that don't fit into headlines or courtroom scripts. And this one means a lot to me. I've always been an advocate for survivors of sexual abuse. Honestly, I've always wanted a platform just for this. To talk about what most people won't. Because sexual abuse isn't just an individual trauma. It's a systemic issue. It hides in institutions, families, clinics, schools, and churches. It's tangled up in power, silence, and shame. For years, I've wanted to become certified in sexual assault nurse examiner nursing to show up in that exact moment when someone's whole world has just changed. Things got complicated I haven't done it yet, not because I don't care, but because it's hard. And we'll talk about that too. We'll talk about how little support there is, how few professionals are trained, how re-traumatizing the system can be, even for people who want to help. And we're definitely going to talk about the court system. Because here's the truth. Nobody wants to go to court. Nobody wants to relive what happened. Tell strangers the worst thing that was ever done to them, and then get cross-examined about whether they were lying. The assumption about how many people just make this up, it's always been wild to me. Because who would choose this? Who wants to sit in front of a judge or a jury or their abuser and have their entire credibility picked apart like a crime scene? Anyway, we need to talk about all of it. Not just what happened, but what happens after. So, if you're here, thank you. If you're not ready, that's okay too. But if you've ever felt silenced, disbelieved, confused by your own body, or punished for surviving, you are not alone. We're going to do this series in parts. Some episodes will be heavier than others. Some might feel close to home. I'll hold them with care. I hope you will too. Let's begin. There's a moment that no one prepares you for. When something outside of you suddenly matches something you've been carrying inside. And the terrifying part, it doesn't always come in a dramatic flash. Sometimes it's just a quiet click. A scene in a show, a throwaway comment, a line in a book. And suddenly, your world is upside down. You start remembering what you weren't ready to remember. You start feeling what you couldn't feel before. And you're left trying to hold on to reality with a nervous system that's screaming, "This was never okay." That's trauma recall. And it's not always loud. It's not always clear. But it is real. And if you've ever had that moment, if you've ever sat in stunned silence, wondering if what happened to you counts, this is your answer. Yes, it counts. Even if you forgot, even if it was blurry, even if it didn't look like abuse, even if you never told a soul until now. You're not broken. You're remembering. And that is the bravest kind of healing there is. When a child experiences something they don't have the language or safety to understand, they don't forget it. They just store it in their body, in their reactions, in their sense of self. And over time, those buried experiences start showing up in ways that get mislabeled or misunderstood. They show up as risky sexual behavior, intense shame, intense insecurity, people pleasing to the point of self-erasure, rage that feels disproportionate, emotional numbness, or black and white thinking, clinginess mistaken for manipulation, or chronic self-harm that no one seems to understand. And the worst part, instead of someone asking what happened, they get told what's wrong with them. It's why so many trauma survivors, especially those with early sexual abuse, get misunderstood with things like borderline personality disorder, because the symptoms look like a personality disorder. But often, what we're actually seeing is a nervous system stuck in survival mode. A child who learned the world wasn't safe and grew up believing that they were the problem. And when you grow up carrying shame that never had a name, sometimes the only way your body can speak is through patterns. Even if those patterns are destructive. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because your brain adapted the only way it could in the environment it was in. If it was really abuse, they would have told someone. No, not always. Not even most of the time. The truth is, many survivors never tell anyone. Not because it didn't happen, but because they didn't have the words for it, or the safe environment to talk about it, or the support, especially when abuse starts early. The brain's job isn't to explain it, it's to survive it. And when the person causing harm is someone trusted, which often it is with children because they only have so many people inside of their circle, right? It could be a parent, a sibling, a coach, a babysitter. The confusion only deepens. The child might even think it's normal until something years later finally makes it click. And even then, shame can be so much louder than truth. It's also important to understand that abuse isn't always violent. It's not always forceful. Sometimes it's just wrapped in secrecy, silence, and games. Sometimes it even feels physically pleasurable. And that's where the shame becomes unbearable. But pleasure does not mean consent. Confusion doesn't mean it didn't happen. And silence, that was self-protection, not consent. If someone says, "Why didn't they tell anyone?" The real question should always be, what kind of a world do we live in where they couldn't? They're just saying that for attention. This is one of the cruelest and most illogical assumptions society makes about survivors. Because the truth is, disclosing abuse rarely brings attention that feels good. It brings conflict, division, shame, isolation, bullying, and often real life altering consequences. Telling the truth about abuse doesn't usually end the pain. It starts a new kind of pain. Families break apart. Custody battles begin. CPS shows up. Kids get labeled, shunned, or sent away. Perpetrators retaliate or walk free. And survivors are left holding the guilt for ruining everything. So you tell me, what kind of attention is that? Telling takes courage. And when a child finally says something, despite knowing it could cost them everything, That's not manipulation. That's survival. It's easy to talk about the abuse like it's over once it's reported. But what happens next can feel like another trauma entirely. Because the people you trusted to protect you, suddenly they're the ones falling apart. Or looking at you like you're the problem. And sometimes you don't even want the person who hurt you to get in trouble or to go to prison. You just want someone to finally get it. And you deserve that. You want someone to say, that should have never happened to you. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. But more often than not, survivors are left managing everyone else's reactions, right? While no one is managing theirs. So if you're carrying resentment, shame, guilt, or rage, even years later, you're not crazy. You're human. And you were handed the cost of telling the truth when someone else should have been protecting you from ever needing to. For years, we've told parents to have the talk with their kids. The one about sex, protection, and consent. But today, that's no longer enough. Not at all. We need to have another talk too. One about sexual abuse. One about trafficking. One about grooming. And how it doesn't always look like a scary man in a van. Sometimes it's a friend. Sometimes it's someone online. Sometimes it's a person they trust. Sometimes it's their family. We have to start giving our kids the language to talk about what doesn't feel right. Because sometimes that's all a kid knows at first. Just that something isn't right. We have to stop treating this conversation like it's taboo. If we can teach them about crossing the street and looking both ways, we can teach them how to protect their bodies, their boundaries, and their trust. Let's be real. Nobody wants to believe someone they love could hurt a child. So we convince ourselves we are being dramatic, overprotective, crazy. We shut down the gut feelings. We explain away the discomfort. But here's the truth. If something feels off, you're allowed to notice. You're allowed to set firmer boundaries. Say no to a sleepover. Ask your kid what someone said to them. Decide that a certain adult doesn't need to be alone with your child. Speak up. Even if you're not 100% sure why you feel uneasy. That's not being insane. That's being safe. Because so many survivors remember feeling weird before they understood what was wrong. They remember the tone, the gaze, the secretive comments. But no one ever helped them decode it until it was too late. So, if you have that consistently nagging feeling, if something feels off every time your child is around a certain person, you don't need proof to protect them. You need presence. You need boundaries. You need the courage to say, I'd rather be overcautious than regretful. I couldn't have told you why at the time. I didn't have proof. I didn't have words. But something about the way he looked at me, something about the way he lingered, it felt wrong. And I remember thinking, if I tell someone, they'll think I'm being dramatic. So I didn't. I swallowed that feeling, explained it away, tried to forget. But my body remembered. And years later, when I finally put it together, I wished someone had told me back then that your gut is enough. You don't need a reason to protect yourself or your kid or your space. If something feels wrong, you're allowed to listen. I think people still don't fully understand how early sexual trauma, even the kind that didn't seem violent or that bad, can quietly hijack someone's entire development. It doesn't just end after the event. It buries itself in the nervous system, in relationships, in the way people love, trust, attach, pull back, push forward, or sabotage connection altogether. And so what happens is they grow up and nobody connects the dots. Instead, they get labeled, diagnosed, misunderstood. They get told they have a mood disorder or a personality disorder, and maybe they do. But the missing piece is often the trauma that no one ever named, that no one ever helped them understand. And that's why this episode isn't just about healing, it's about prevention. Because if we don't teach kids the language, if we don't talk about coercion, secrecy, grooming, even within families, then it's going to keep happening. We have to break the pattern. We have to name the things we were never given the words for. So, we are going to talk about the pattern we never named. So, when a child is sexually abused, especially in subtle or nonviolent ways, the world doesn't explode around them. There's no police report, no visible scars. Life just continues. But inside that child, something fundamental shifts. The nervous system adapts. It learns that safety is unpredictable. That love might mean discomfort. That touch might not come with choice. That saying no doesn't always matter. and that the body stores that confusion in muscles, in memory, in the way they breathe. It becomes a baseline for relationships, even if they don't remember the details. The myth of it wasn't that bad. Here's the thing people really don't get. It doesn't have to be violent to be traumatizing. It doesn't have to be rape to be abuse. It could have been a game, or a cousin, or a moment they didn't understand until years later. But the brain doesn't need a violent event to be permanently altered. What it needs is meaning, right? And if that meaning was, my body isn't mine, or this is how I get love or attention, or I'm supposed to keep secrets to stay safe, then the trauma is real. It changes their entire emotional foundation. That early rewiring, it doesn't just disappear. It shows up in adulthood. But now it has new names. BPD, bipolar, codependency, rejection sensitivity, hypersexuality, numbness, rage. People start getting labeled for the symptoms, while the root trauma never gets talked about. They struggle with intimacy, but don't know why. They chase toxic validation or avoid sex completely. They crave closeness and then panic when they get it. They aren't crazy. They're patterned. And those patterns were laid down in childhood by an experience that was never metabolized. This is where misdiagnosis becomes dangerous. It becomes a trap. Because if a clinician sees the mood swings or impulsivity or emotional intensity and just writes down BPD without ever asking about early sexual experiences, they've missed the point. Trauma is slippery. It doesn't always say its name. It doesn't always introduce itself. But if we don't look deeper, we end up medicating the pain without understanding the source. We risk re-traumatizing the client. Or worse, making them feel broken when they were actually trying to survive something they didn't have the words for. Prevention isn't just teaching kids to say no to strangers. It's helping them understand what a boundary is and that they're allowed to have one, even with people they love. It's teaching them about grooming, secrecy, and body autonomy before it happens, not after. It's giving them words that don't feel shameful. It's teaching parents to stop forcing hugs, to listen when something feels off. To not dismiss weird behavior as just a phase, because every time we stay silent or treat abuse like it's too uncomfortable to name, we create another generation that has to unlearn silence in order to survive. Another myth: if they were too young to remember, it probably didn't affect them. The truth is, the body remembers what the brain can't. Even pre-verbal or early childhood abuse gets encoded in the body through implicit memory, shaping future emotional responses, attachment patterns, and fear circuitry. Even if there are no conscious memories. This is a message to survivors and a call forward. If you're listening and you've lived this, if your body still holds things your brain can't explain, I just want to say, you're not dramatic. You're not damaged. You're not too much. You're reacting to something that was too big, too soon, and too hidden. And if it's still showing up in your relationships or your sense of self, that doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're still carrying something that was never yours to begin with. And it is not too late to give it back. But here's the part we don't always want to say out loud. Even though what happened wasn't your fault, the healing is your responsibility now. Not because you deserved the pain, but because you deserve the freedom. And so do the kids around you. Whether you're a parent or not, someone is watching how you handle your story. Someone is learning from your scars and your silence. And what they need to see is not perfection. They need to see someone who chose to heal anyway. Someone who took what broke them and said, "This ends with me." So let's talk numbers, because people still don't grasp how serious this is. Not just emotionally, but neurologically, developmentally, relationally. This isn't just about bad memories. This is about childhood sexual abuse can literally rewire a brain. Brain and development. Neuroimaging studies show that survivors of childhood sexual abuse often have structural and functional changes in key brain areas, including amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex, the areas responsible for fear, response, memory, and emotional regulation. Chronic exposure to sexual abuse and other forms of maltreatment in childhood leads to overactivation of the HPA axis, which is the body's stress system, which can result in long-term problems with cortisol regulation, anxiety, and sleep. Speaking of sleep, I'm working on an insomnia episode that I'm excited about. Survivors are at significantly higher risk of developing complex PTSD, dissociative symptoms, and disorders like borderline personality disorder, particularly if the abuse occurred before age 12. Childhood sexual abuse survivors are 2 to 4 times more likely to develop major depression, bipolar disorder, and substance use disorders as adults. One of the most chilling stats is over 75% of women diagnosed with BPD report histories of childhood sexual abuse. Adults who experienced childhood sexual abuse are at increased risk of suicidal ideation and attempts, with some studies estimating up to a 7-fold increase in suicide attempts compared to non-abused populations. Okay, I can already tell I'm not getting this all into one episode, and that's okay. This is too important to rush. I'll see you in part 2. And in part 2, we're going to discuss a lot of different things, including healing, stigma, shame, and as always, what can we do moving forward, and how this is a systemic issue. Thank you.